You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 364 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's a beautiful night in Wrigleyville. I got the honor of watching several Chicago police officers disassembling the yellow gates around Wrigley Field today that they use for traffic purposes. So you know the season is officially over.
The season is over. We will unpack the final week that was for the Cubs 2024 season. We've got a lot of news to talk about as we wrap up this season. We'll have our full end of season wrap up closure episode next week. But this week we're going to unpack the news. We're going to talk about the week that was. And to help us do that, it's longtime friend of the show. You know him from his work at NBC Chicago. Please welcome back James Neveau. James, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
It's good to be with you, boys. Cheers to a great season. I did deliberately wait until you guys started the show to crack the beer open. I will not name the company that's, making the beer because you guys aren't getting paid by them, so why should they get the free pub?
No, cheers as well. I've gone with the G4 Reposado Tequila tonight to celebrate the end of the season, and it's sad that it's over, but it's also a relief that it's over because it was just the same thing all season long. It felt like the way it ended. We'll start there.
Mm-hmm.
You predicted a 3-3 week, Pat.
I mean, it wasn't hard to predict, was it? At this point.
And it sure was. The Cubs lost 2 out of 3 in Philadelphia, and then proceeded to win 2 of 3 against the Reds. We'll get to the Reds series in a minute because we'll talk about Kyle Hendricks and the special things we saw in the Cincinnati series. But the Philadelphia series, I think, was extra difficult. Not only watching them celebrate winning their division, but you made a note, Pat, that this is the Cubs team that could have been.
Yeah, watching Kyle Schwarber, former Cub, who was cut by Jed Hoyer to save $2 million, hitting a home run in that first. I think it was the first game, and then to see Bryce Harper, who was a near Cub at one point in time, who probably would have extended the core and the lifespan of this team and made them much better in that 2018, 2019, 2020 period. And then Trey Turner, who I had certainly hoped the Cubs would consider, along with Francisco Lindor, acquiring its shortstop when there were something like 7 shortstops on the open market. And, Carlos Correa was another one. And you had your Corey Seagers and then there was Dansby Swanson. And
the 6th best shortstop.
Or 7th, I guess, depending on how you looked at it at the time. But yeah, it was watching those guys all perform well. And then former Cub Nick Castellanos, which was a nice guy to see again. Although probably wouldn't have been as necessary for the Cubs' current situation. But boy, can you imagine having Harper and Schwarber's bats in the lineup and having somebody as dynamic as Turner? That this Cubs lineup would be, you mix in those lefties with the righties they have, like the Suzuki's and others, and this would be a high octane offense. Would have been very fun to watch.
People forget, James, that Bryce Harper wanted to come to the Cubs in 2018. I was at a Golden Knights hockey game that him and Chris Bryant were at together.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he sent all of the signals he could possibly send without literally saying the words, "Hey Cubs, sign me to a deal," or pulling an Andre Dawson or something like that. It really was one of those things where it felt like a marriage that was kind of inevitable, and you had all of the pieces in place to make it happen, and then the Cubs instead decided to shell out big bucks on some, Jason Haywardy contracts and things like that. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, guess we have to pull the reins back a little bit. And it's like, no, you don't get to the NLCS 3 years in a row and then pull the reins back. That's not what you're supposed to do when you're a major market team. And instead, the Cubs decided that they needed to hit the brakes, slow things down. And what have we seen since then? A whopping 3 playoff games since 2017.
In fairness to the Ricketts, because I don't want to be too harsh on them.
Yes, you've come to the right place.
The Cubs did not acquire Bryce Harper when they could have, but they did go out and get another bat that winter. Don't forget the Daniel Descalso.
Thank God!
Sure.
So man,
you know what? This is why I come on this podcast, Pat, because I'll go off on my anti-Ricketts diatribes, and you're always the voice of reason and the one who's so quick to point out that they always are willing to open up the proverbial checkbooks for players of the ilk of the Daniel Descalsos and the Trey Mancinis and the Eric Hosmers of the world. Woe be anybody who forgets such high-impact signings. Thank you so much for setting me right, Pat.
You're more than welcome.
I just think ultimately the point is that they hit the brakes when they needed to be hitting the gas, and we've seen the results of it for the last 7 seasons. I mean, that's literally all you have to say. 3 playoff games in total in those seasons, and they lost all 3 of them. And they've lost to such vaunted teams as the Colorado Rockies, who we all remember the incredible run they went on in 2018, and the Miami Marlins, who have really had a ton of successes recently and really used that as a springboard to grit. I'm being told that neither of those things actually happened. So it just is one of those things where it's like, they decided that they had enough, I suppose, of, being a super successful team. And they decided that it was time to start making the tough, draconian money cuts, a bit earlier than,
I don't arbitrary.
know, logic. Then logic would have dictated. And it just ended up being, we're using Wrigley to print money, and that's pretty much all we're going to need. And I know it's been said so often, it, becomes kind of a rote exercise to go into it, but it remains true that this team decided to stop spending money at exactly the wrong time, and it cost them a generational talent. And as you said, guys, like just a list of guys who could have potentially been still helping the team to this day.
If I didn't dislike the Dodgers so much historically, I would probably want to root for them on principle, because the notion, they went out and they got Betts, and then they went out and they got Freddie Freeman, and they were willing to get Turner, and then and just keep churning these guys out with Ohtani and player after player after player who are like star level caliber players. I have a lot of respect for that. I just wish it hadn't been the Dodgers, because that would have.
And I mean, they went out and got guys like Tyler Glass now too. Yeah. And then they also were not afraid to cut bait with players if they felt like there were upgrades available. Like, you have situations where you have like Justin Turner's and Adrian Gonzalez's of the world, and they could say, well, that's good enough. And instead, as you said, they go out and they continue to develop guys like, your Max Muncy's to plug them into third base, or they go out and get a Freddie Freeman. Like, you're 1,000% right about that, Pat. They are never willing to shy away from difficult decisions. And boy, their hit rate on those decisions, it's pretty dang good. You have to give them credit where it's due.
We were big Freddie Freeman fans at the time and had been lobbying. I think probably the 2 players I lobbied the hardest for the Cubs to sign over the course of the last 8 years or so were Bryce Harper and Freddie Freeman. And for various reasons and for the timing of when it happened. But, Freeman, for that contract looks really good, in retrospect, and he's such a consistent guy with the Braves, just almost as low a risk as you can get, I think, at that level of spending, and would have really, I know the Cubs, already had a first baseman at the time, Frank Schwindel, and they were looking to move into Eric Hosmer and Trey Mancini shortly thereafter, but it just would have been another option that they could have explored.
On the other side of that, you have the Phillies, who we saw the Cubs play this week. Like we mentioned, they made those big free agent deals. Do you remember when they signed Bryce Harper to that deal? The Cubs were like, "Well, we just couldn't do it. I mean, who's going to pay that money in that term? Come on, that really scared them off." And in hindsight, now what a great deal that was for Bryce Harper, is where being completely oblivious to where the market could go 4 star players like that. And they have these big free agents like you mentioned, but then they went out and they have homegrown talent. Like they have at least like 3 or 4 players in their starting lineup that are homegrown talent. They have pitching prospects that came up to pitch for them. They are a very good example of a good balance between it. It's what the Cubs really have no excuse not to be able to do.
Well, it was sort of what the Cubs had hoped or said they were going to do when the Marquee Network got up and running. Remember, we waited on that for a while, and then it turns out that wasn't as profitable as anticipated. And feels like they've been able to eke out some money here or there on other things, but just not willing to invest it in the team. And that's where we're at. So it is kind of an interesting dichotomy to go from playing the Phillies, who have gone full bore into trying to win and been successful at it, to the Reds, which sadly feels like a place where Hoyer and company might be more comfortable. And we saw a Reds team this week, after that Phillies series is just a real stark contrast in terms. They've got some good young players too, don't get me wrong, but they have nothing in the way of like veteran talent on that team whatsoever. Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, that David Ross is going to end up being their manager at some point soon. So, I mean, that's, going to be even more incentive for a Jed Hoyer to be like, hey, you know what? Cincinnati's nice this time of year. Why not? We go, get some nice land along the Ohio River and see what happens. But yeah, I think the other thing to mention too is that the Braves or the Phillies and Dodgers have both done the kind of mix of spending and developing. The Atlanta Braves have done the exact same thing. I know that they've had so many injuries this season,
Cursed team this year.
Absolutely. And heck, Chris Sale, who by the way is probably going to win the National League Cy Young Award, they went out and got on a lark from the Red Sox. And again, it's just like one of those things that it's like, this is a team that decided that good wasn't good enough. And they just went out and got Chris Sale. And who knew that was going to work out the way that it did? But it just, again, shows this is a team willing to make the moves necessary, whether it's to let Freddie Freeman go and to bring Matt Olson in or to go out and get a Sean Murphy. Like, they are always willing to do what it takes to build that roster. And that's why they are just perennially contending. And they eked into the playoffs this year. But think about that. Like, you had your best players out. You've had so many injuries to so many key guys, and they're still in the playoffs. And they're 6
won like
games
89 games.
And I was going to say 6 games ahead of the Cubs. What the hell are the Cubs doing that they can't compete with that ravaged Braves team?
I look forward to the day when the Cubs have so much depth that their 8 best players can all go down and we still make the playoffs with 89 wins. Just saying.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, when I saw that it was going to be Cubs and Reds to close the season, I always get frustrated with these September games against the Reds because they bring up all these kids who are playing for spots and like trying to make it. They're always harder and more difficult than they need to be. Not the case this weekend.
Walking this week,
they barely showed up. Almost no runs. Let's talk about the
when you go the first 27 innings of a series without scoring a single run. That's usually a sign that you're not, your heart's not maybe completely in it.
No, the Cubs beat the Reds 1-0. The lone run was an Amaya sac fly, and the time
After
of the game,
a leadoff double, bunt to third, sac fly. It was a very 1978 type of game.
I don't know, with the way the wind was blowing that day, I kind of was okay with that. Like, you're just not going to get the ball anywhere in the air. It was a crazy day out there at the ballpark. That was one of the more surreal games that I can remember. And hey, it saved Willie Harris's job, lest we forget sending Nico Horner on that play.
Right.
That's what turned it all around for Willie.
1 hour, 48 minutes time of the game, the shortest 9-inning game for the Cubs since May 24th, 2001. A complete game one hitter by John Lieber, also against the Cincinnati Reds.
Well,
a game that we speculated we believe we were at, but
You know what? It probably is an easier exercise to figure out what games you guys were not at during that era of Cubs baseball. One would assume. Yeah,
that feels like a very Bill Miller, led offense with John Lieber on the mound. But,
did Darrell Ward have a pinch hit in that game or something? Like that's kind of that vintage too.
Yes, this was Ron Coomer holding down third base there.
Oh,
Pat.
boy.
Not Bill Miller. You did have Matt Stairs in left field, Gary Matthews Jr. patrolling center field.
That's right.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
We're getting into some guys portion of the episode.
That's right.
Sammy and company.
Yes.
Sammy and the Jets.
So let's talk about the Saturday game with Kyle Hendricks. That was the story of the week for me. This was what a moment. Pat, you and I were both at the Kyle Hendricks game he pitched against Paul Skeens, and I was like, is this the last time we see Kyle Hendricks at Wrigley Field? It was not. Saturday was, and thank goodness it was. What a way for Kyle Hendricks to go out.
Vintage Kyle.
He got all the love, sweet emotion playing on the speakers at Wrigley Field. He gets all the kudos. He gets the standing ovation from the crowd, and everyone just let him take it in. Even the Reds players were clapping for the performance of Kyle Hendricks. James, your thoughts on the moment and Kyle Hendricks, his career at Wrigley?
Yeah, assuming that it's over, and I think that there's every indication to believe that it is. I think that he, it seems somewhat appropriate, I suppose, that he was the last guy standing from that 2016 team just because he went about his business in such a workmanlike manner. They just kind of forgot to fire him. They just kind of let him, at his workbench. But I think that, through all the ups and downs this season, you kept seeing the flashes of what made him such a special pitcher. And the reaction of the crowd to him on Saturday, his reaction when Tommy Hotovy came out to get him, and then his comments that he made to Boog and JD during the game on Sunday were just all so vintage Kyle Hendricks. And I loved him kind of showing the vulnerability and the emotion in a way that he usually doesn't. I know that he's kind of developed that reputation of being very even keel no matter what's going on. Like anytime he smiled, it felt like it made, front page headlines in Chicago. But just like seeing him be able to like really articulate what that moment meant to him, really, it touched something in me just as a fan and as a person and somebody who's really appreciated the work that he's done over the years. And so I was really excited to see him to get that moment, him getting to his, 10 years of service time this season and all of the things that have gone on with him. You just feel really good for him. And whatever the next step is, I'm sure that, Kyle will, if he wants to coach, if he wants to be an exec, if he wants to just completely leave baseball altogether, going to have a very successful life. But I'm really glad that he spent so long here and I think really got to showcase his skill and then ultimately his true colors and his true personality in these last few months that he's been here. It was really, really heartening to see that and very cool to take that all in.
Absolutely. And it was so nice to have him leave on a high note like this, to pitch the 7 shutout innings, come out for the 8th for that last batter, and then be able to leave off the mound to a standing ovation. It's been a really rough year for him this year. Probably not even a great decision to bring him back for the $14.5 million, as it turns out. I mean, we and others, I'm sure, have speculated over the course of the season. There were times when we thought he was going to get cut. And then someone would magically get injured or he would go on the IL or whatever and dodge that. And so...
And he reinvented himself in the bullpen. I mean, he had a stretch there where we were, is he going to get cut? He goes to the bullpen and actually contributed quite a few games over there.
So for him to be able to come out and pitch like his old self, it reminded me of the NLCS against the Dodgers there in that game 6, that 7 1/3 2-hit ball then, shutout baseball. And so just a perfect way to go out. And I appreciate the fact that it worked out this way. And I'm glad he was able to make it through the season, as it turns out. All things being equal, might as well, right? I'd rather see him the last weekend of the season than some unknown young, pitcher who they acquired, off the waiver wire. So great pitcher, great career. I think we'll look back so fondly on his time with the Cubs, and he'll be one of those guys who, if he ever wants to, like you said, world's his oyster in terms of being able to do stuff with the organization, I think, moving forward, and Chicago sports media or whatever he wants to do, because he is the professor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite Kyle Hendricks moment, James?
I mean, there's a few obviously that kind of stand out. I think everyone's going to kind of default to him going out in Game 6 of the NLCS at Wrigley and just pitching, just absolute nails, just like consummate pro. Fooling Dodgers left and right. His performance in Game 7 in the World Series, I feel like it's so overlooked. The way
He
that
should have been left in longer in that game.
People were
God.
outraged when he got pulled. Outraged.
It was absolutely insane. And like everybody talks about all the home runs that were hit, and rightfully so. And argues about Joe Madden and his usage of John Lester and Aroldis Chapman in that game. But I think that Hendricks coming in the way that he did and pitching the way that he did was just such a great bit of evidence as to just the drive that he has in him, and just the moment was never too big for him. And so I think that everyone's always going to look back at Game 6 of the NLCS and really say that was the ultimate Kyle Hendricks performance. I think that you can argue Game 7, the way that he came out and just was that steadying influence amid all of the insanity in Cleveland. I got to give him so much credit. He was exactly the guy they needed on the mound in that moment for that game. So that to me really stood out in terms of a performance.
I remember him coming up big a lot in home openers. Remember, like 2 years ago, my dad and I went to a home opener against the Brewers, and he pitched lights out, a shutout that game. I know he did during the COVID season. I mean, he just there's something about him and home openers that I always fully appreciated his effort to handcuff the opposing batters.
I will say that him striking out 8 Giants on my birthday this season was like, I always love those turn back the clock moments where you're just kind of like, well, Kyle Hendricks, he's been coming out of the bullpen, and then all of a sudden he has to start a game. Like, what are we going to see? And then he just came out and was exactly who he had been so much. Like, he got his ground balls and then was just striking guys out left and right. And it's like, you know what? Fine, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and take this for what it's worth.
He did that to Ellie De La Cruz the other day on Saturday, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Like, that's a perfect pitch. Like, I mean, just he had a way to rise to the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so great to see. I mean, he had some low lows over the past 2 seasons that he was able to hang around, not get cut, and then go out the way he did and have those flashes, like the San Francisco game you mentioned, the game this weekend. He had those flashes of the bullpen appearances. He was able to leave us with a happy memories and not overstay his welcome here. So I was happy to see him get the treatment he deserved and the ovation. And I look forward to seeing what's next for Kyle Hendricks as well.
And it was a packed house, by the way, too. It was nice to, it wasn't like he was just appearing in front of like 8,000 fans. It was crowded.
Yes, it was not crowded for the final game. There
was some other team in town playing. Like, I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been the Bears.
Nevertheless, the Cubs finished 6th in Major League Baseball in total attendance this year.
That they did.
2.9 million, the highest in like 6 years, I think.
And
put a quality product on the field occasionally, and that's what happens.
You worry that that's the formula of finish in the top 10 in attendance by being just close enough to be in the conversation for the final spot in a playoff appearance. That you hope that's not that's not the pattern that we're going to see more than it's been the last few years here. You hope that we don't have to see it again, because 83 and 79 again, Pat.
Yeah, just like old times, right? And to me, anyway, this felt worse than last year. And it's weird because last year the Cubs collapsed, so that felt bad in its own right. But I could rationalize it away. I'm like, well, Alzolay got hurt and blew a couple games, around the injury and wasn't really himself. And the Cubs hit better last year, which I guess gave me some hope. And for whatever reason, it seemed there's something about playing down till the end of the season that gives you, more, I guess, more hope for the future. Like this year, it felt like we were kind of out of it in July, at the trade deadline, if not earlier in July. And then they kept sputtering around and staying around and kind of like, it's like, well, if we go on a run, and true, it was true. All of August, September, if we just gone on a run in September, we could have been competitive, but we didn't. We had historic, like, terrible losses to Colorado back to back after a Dodgers game. Just very frustrating season. And to end up, 6.5 or 6, I don't know, whatever we're going to end up out of the playoffs, and not just out of the playoffs, but like not the 7 slot, tied for 8th with the Cardinals out of 15. So we're in the 8-9 slot out of 15 teams, closer to the Reds, at the like 11 or 12 spot than we are to the playoffs. It really felt like mediocrity in a way that last year felt better, I guess, to me.
It certainly, I think it feels slightly different because a lot of the guys that we were kind of talking about coming up and potentially making impacts for the Cubs were still at least a year away, and you wanted to see how they would do as they progress through the system. I think that having guys like Owen Casey and Kevin Alcantara and Matt Shaw make it all the way up to AAA this season and to continue hitting the way that they did, it gives you a little bit of optimism about their status with the team and kind of gives you a little bit of optimism that perhaps some of them could be used to inject life into this squad for next season. I think that also having the really good turnaround year for Jamison Taillon and then the performances of guys like Michael Busch and Shota Imanaga that you brought in via trade and free agency, I think that those things all kind of lead you to believe that maybe this is a little bit better because you still think there's a little bit of perhaps upswing there that's going to occur as these things kind of continue to play out. But
and yet it wasn't better. That's
exactly.
That's the weird part, right?
I think ultimately it goes to show again, like that. I think, Jeremy, you mentioned this right off the jump from this show that the week that was the 3-3 record, that was basically the 2024 Chicago Cubs in a microcosm. It was always one step forward and one step back. And I think that rather than last season when it all kind of blew apart in the last couple of weeks of the season, this was a like 162 game deflating of the balloon and just a consistent fart noise. And I think
you felt pain at least twice a week.
Yeah,
at least twice a week. They're like, we should have won that game. We should have won that game. That's going to come back to haunt us.
Could never just get your feet underneath
weeks.
you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it has a little bit of a different feel just because of that. Like, yeah, there's reason to believe that maybe you're putting some air back into the balloon with some of the guys that they were able to acquire, but just the maddening drone of the fart noise, I think, makes this season not more disappointing. I think just ultimately more annoying is how I would phrase it.
And the things that were problems at the beginning of the year were problems at the end of the year, were problems throughout the whole thing, and they were just never addressed. Things never got better. Like it just kept going slowly.
So what? The what? Like the one exception to that is maybe the fact they started getting a little bit of offense out of the catcher spot, like that. And even then, like it wasn't like they had a world beater back there. It just happened that Miguel Amaya and Christian Betancourt didn't completely suck. Like that was like and then Seiya Suzuki moving to the DH spot, so we didn't have to deal with him in right field anymore. Those were like the two minor victories that we had in that regard. But in terms of like, long-term fixes, you're absolutely right, Jeremy. Like nothing was tremendously different from, I think, what we expected.
So as we look a little bit ahead, let's, we'll do the full, what do the Cubs need to do to get better episode next week. But just while you're here, James, I want to get your thoughts on, you've got someone like Imanaga, who was obviously the highlight of the season. He was the can't miss when he's pitching, reason to watch. Besides Imanaga, are the Cubs going to be closer to playoff contention next season than they were this year? Like, what's the path that you see them needing? How do they address this? What's their top priorities going into the offseason?
So I think that the only other thing I can even think of that held a candle to how well Imanaga pitched was I think that watching the development in the second half of the season of Pete Crow Armstrong was really heartening because, God, were we concerned that this was just going to be a total bust and we had no idea what the heck to expect from him. And there are still moments where you're like, okay, PCA, you got to have a little bit more competitive at bat there, but he does so many things well and just is able to capitalize on those gifts that it's like, okay, fine, we're allowed to have a little bit of hope here. But I think that ultimately, I think they are closer to contention, but I think the road is going to be harder than maybe some folks think, because obviously you can just say, well, go out and spend in free agency or swing a trade or whatever. And all I see on this team are guys with movable contracts. The Justin Steeles and the Nico Horners of the world are ultimately important pieces, and it means that you absolutely have to hit on those trades immediately if you make them. But then on the flip side of that, you also have guys that you should want to get rid of that have massive contracts and or no trade clauses. I think it's a really tough recipe and a really tough kind of combination to crack, because you have to be able to get yourself some flexibility and to be able to make moves in free agency and in the trade market. But some of the guys that you need to replace are ultimately really difficult to move without eating way too big of a contract. And so I think that they're closer, but the road is harder, if that makes sense. That's kind of the way that I felt about it for most of the second half of this season. And boy, it still feels that way looking at what they've got ahead of them.
Yeah, there was a tweet from Bob Nightingale today saying that Cardinals player payroll will be reduced in 2025, leading to their highest priced players being available in trade talks such as Sonny Gray, Nolan Arenado, and Wilson Contreras.
I'll take them all.
Would you bring in a Paul Goldschmidt? Maybe they said they're probably not bringing him back either.
Yeah, he's 400 years old though. I don't know. The problem, like as you said, James, where would you play any of these guys too? Like catcher, sure, but Goldschmidt seems redundant.
Yep.
Arenado,
the only thing he has going for him is he does hit for decent power against lefties, and Michael Busch pretty clearly is not trusted to do that based on his usage by Craig Counsell.
You mean against Cub lefties? I guess he probably does it against other lefties too, but I'm more familiar with how he does against us.
Yeah.
I just hope that doesn't mean that the Cubs take that as an opportunity to not spend, because the Cardinals are they're going to be bad.
If the Cardinals are willing to take a step back, and you're only and your primary competition is a Brewers team that kind of smoke and mirror their way through a season. I don't care what anybody says. Then the Cubs could be primed for again, as we say almost every year, to be the favorites to win a divisional title if they can make the moves that James alluded to, and actually patch up some of these holes and fix some of the weaknesses on their team. I mean, if they're willing to do it, it's there for the taking. How about that? It's not like they're in a division that's impossible where you have to battle like three major market teams that are all going to try to outspend you for every player. That's just not the case here.
That was the case this year too, and we saw how they approached the offseason.
Yeah.
All right, Pat, you have some questions for us?
I do. I have 3 questions for you. Cool. So as we start to frame the offseason and look forward to the future, I think we probably would all agree, and I think the Cubs would agree too, that pretty much every major league team does this these days, but they're going to go out and add some bullpen pieces. Everybody does. That's just the nature of bullpens these days, right? I mean, Porter Hodge pitched well in these save situations, mostly kind of after the Cubs had already kind of sealed their fate, but still pitched well all season for the Cubs. And they've got a couple other promising arms, but they're going to need to go out, and whether they spend big or whether they do a combination of big and little, or just get a bunch of, refurbished players as they often do. And sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. There will definitely be spending on the bullpen. So I feel like we can kind of shelve that to the side for a minute. We talked about Kyle Hendricks. So Kyle Hendricks gone. So that means that the Cubs have 4 starting pitchers left who started about like 75-80% of all the Cubs starts. Like it was pretty consistent. It was Shota Imanaga, Jameson Taillon, Javier Assad, and Justin Steele. Those were the starters. So my first question to you, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being that next year as a unit, now, and this is like leaving, catastrophic health issues to the side. You can't predict that, but just, all things being equal, scale of 1 to 5. Next year, will that group as a unit, as a composite, will they, and I guess 5 would be significantly improve, 4 would be somewhat improve, 3 would be pitched basically the way they did this year with the same results, the same stats as they did this year. 2 would be a slight regression or some regression, and 1 would be significant regression. Where do you see those four guys as a group coming in next year, assuming they're all starting? And Assad may not be a starter next year, we'll find out, but assuming they are, and assuming nobody has Tommy John surgery between now and in April, or some similar situation, where do you see them lining up next year?
You want to take first crack at this, Jeremy, or you want me to?
I'll make it quick. I see definitely a slight regression for guys like Imanaga, who's not getting any younger. He's already old, even though he's a rookie. I see slight regression for a guy like Taillon. I mean, we were thrilled to see what we saw this season. It's not that great. It was fine, but sometimes you got the Jameson Taillon experience when you turned on the game. And so I don't have a lot of confidence that that's going to get any better. I think the Justin Steele has, he had a lot of injury issues and what have you this season. He's the only one with a chance to have a more positive non-regression as compared to the rest of the folks.
So you're a 2.
I'm a 2.
I think I'd probably be a little bit more of a 3, just because I do agree with Jeremy, where I think that you're probably going to see a little bit of regression from Shota Imanaga. I think that, the home runs are a little bit worrisome. I know that he didn't have a lot of guys on base, so it didn't really kill him to give up the home runs that he did. I did love the way he attacked the strike zone, and guys really were not, for the most part, able to kind of adjust to that. It's not like he had to continually, weather storms or anything. Like, he had a pretty consistent overall production. So I think a little bit of regression, but I think that ultimately the bones are there to still have a good season. I definitely think you'll see regression from Taillon. I think that he had a better season than I had anticipated him having. I think that him being able to limit the walks this season was so critically important. And I thought that he pitched well in a lot of situations. I mean, I love the way he was pitching on Friday, for example. So I think probably regression from him. The one guy that I think Justin Steele is going to be Justin Steele. I think he's, assuming he stays healthier than he did, you'll probably see a little bit of improvement there, a little bit better luck. Still a really good, strong strikeout pitcher this season, about an average of a strikeout every inning. I think that that's going to continue. The one guy that I do think you end up seeing a little bit more improvement from is I do think you see more out of Javier Assad. It just felt like his season proceeded in such weird fits and starts. Like, I thought that he had a rougher time commanding some of his pitches this season. I think that you maybe see him trend back a little bit toward what he was able to do in 2023, maybe not quite hit the level that he was that season. But I think when you combine that, a little bit of a healthier Justin Steele, and then the regressions you see from Imanaga and Taillon, I do think that ultimately I'm right there in the middle in terms of that question. I think I'd be about a 3.
When I looked at the fielding independent pitching, the FIP for all these pitchers, with the exception of Steele, the rest of them all significantly outperformed their FIPs last year. Now, some people do that. Kyle Hendricks did it for years. Mm-hmm. Most people don't. Javier Assad really outperformed it. And that, in combination with this whole, we talk a lot about how the weather at Wrigley was so terrible for hitters. Oh, it was such a, so hard for hitters, such a pitcher's park. Well, there's the flip side to that, which is that it was very, very, very favorable to pitchers, apparently, mm-hmm. right? So that's something that if that were to equalize in any way, would probably result in, as you pointed out, with Shota, maybe some more home runs there, with all of them, frankly, more runs being allowed. So when I factor that all in, I'm a strong 2. I could see I could see it being a 1, frankly, or a 3, but I'm going with 2. I think all things being equal, as a unit, those 4 guys will be slightly worse next year than this year.
Mm-hmm.
And, Towns gonna be what, 33 probably. Things happen, you get older. Which I guess is just the question I wanted to ask, because as we start talking about potential acquisitions of starting pitching, that's been a hot topic lately. Some people say, well, why do they need a starting pitcher? That's the strength of their team. Yeah, okay. But I could see where having a Max Fried or a Corbin Burns or somebody could really help give you a lot more confidence in that starting staff when Javier Assad's your 5th starter. And if he does blow up, maybe, whether it's Ben Brown or one of the other guys,
Cade Horton, Caleb
pitches
Killian,
again.
Yeah.
Caleb Killian, yeah.
You never know, man. Like, there weirder things have happened.
He pitched his 4 scoreless innings against the Reds. I'll give him credit for that. Or whatever it was.
Hey, it was an injury-plagued year that ended in a nice way. God, you're always such a negative Nelly over there, Pat.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's something to keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting to see whether they invest for either because if they feel like it's the only way they can invest, or they feel they need to invest money in starting pitching, and how much they put into that will tell you a little bit about where they feel that situation lines up. I just think one more really good quality starter would help them in playoff push, and with injuries and other things that occur during the course of the years, we always see, would really help stabilize the starting rotations. That's my first question.
It also helps that it's a very robust market too. Like, that's definitely an area I think
a market
that,
for it, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that you have to keep that in mind. You have that many opportunities to improve. Why wouldn't you do that? You get the best bang for your buck that way.
Yes. Okay. Number 2, second question. And we talked a little bit about Pico Armstrong and Miguel Amaya earlier, and also Michael Busch, young players. We hope that there is some progression and they get better if they are still in their jobs. But certainly Armstrong and Busch, we expect to be back next year, and expect to, whether it's Busch hitting an extra 8 home runs or Pico Armstrong, with a little bit less swing and miss, whatever the case might be, we're hoping that they get better. And knock on wood, they will. You don't know, because as we've seen, it's so tricky with guys. Like, I was thinking about Anthony Rizzo earlier today, and how when he first came up with San Diego and famously struggled, and then the Cubs traded Andrew Kashner for him, and he came here and he was good. But
he struggled.
Most people forget that he struggled in 2013. He struggled his second year with the Cubs. He was still a slightly above average hitter, but he struggled that year, and it wasn't until 2014 that he really took off lights out. So sophomore slumps are not an uncommon thing. So knock on wood, we don't have those, because can't really afford them given our lineup. But that's not my question. My question is this. Outside of those guys, when you look at what I call the core 5 guys, these are the guys you're paying money to who are veteran players. It includes Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Seiya Suzuki, Cody Bellinger, and Ian Happ, right? I'm not even including Paredes in this. I'm just saying the big 5, right? That are all 27 to 32 years old and are signed on contracts. Same scale, 1 to 5. Collectively, as a unit, how are they going to do next year vis-a-vis how they did this year? So that's Happ, who had tied his career high in home runs and really had a great season. Seiya Suzuki had his best season ever as a Cub. Cody Bellinger, who was a little bit down this year from last year. Nico Horner, who by hitting 700 in September got his batting average up to 276 and got right back up to his career norms. And Dansby Swanson, who came close to doing that himself by having a strong last month. But and I'm talking offensively here, not necessarily defense, but just offensively, like with these 5 guys. Where do you see them as a group finishing next year versus where they were this year?
James, you can take this one first.
Assuming that Cody Bellinger is back, because I can't
100%.
I can't necessarily say with certainty that he's going to opt into the remaining 2 years of the deal. Like, there's an argument to be made that if he opts out, he's probably a top 5 position player in this year's market, just based on what's going to be available in the outfield outside of Juan Soto. So I think that that's a pretty significant, qualifier to this. But I will also say that, as somebody who has seen Ian Happ and the way that he always tends to turn it on in the second half of the season and has that really steady production. Or you look at Seiya Suzuki, you did have, a career year in some ways, but also pretty close in terms of, his overall numbers for, home runs, RBIs, batting average, etc. Like, I think that, you look at that and where's like there's not a big upswing to me with any of those particular guys. Like, I don't really see Dansby Swanson being a, 25, 30 home run guy for the Cubs. I do not see it. I don't think that Ian Happ is going to see another jump in his power. I think you're pretty much getting what you're going to get. Seiya Suzuki, not exactly getting any younger. And if he's going to be more of a full-time DH, it makes you wonder what that does to his overall value. I think that you look at all of those factors, I'm probably a little bit more of a 2 in this situation because I just don't see the potential for a really big jump. The thing I do see is for a guy like Cody Bellinger to maybe start to continue to slide back to what we were seeing from him in like 2020 and 2021, et cetera. Ian Happ's not getting any younger. I think that he's still obviously going to be a really solid player. I just don't see a ton of upside. The one guy that I have questions about with that is Nico Horner, but I also think you pretty much know what you're getting out of him. So I think that in terms of that, I would have to argue most likely with those core guys, I'm probably at about a 2.
If you loved the 1 through 9 lineup of your 2024 Chicago Cubs, you're going to love the 1 through 9 lineup of your 2025 Chicago Cubs because it's going to be real similar. We're running it back again. We'll see if Cody Bellinger does opt out. I mean, we all thought that Marcus Stroman was going to opt into his opt-in, and he opted out. And it's absolutely possible that Bellinger doesn't come back. But even if he does, this is a 2 for me. The only, I like to see. I think there's still a chance that Michael Busch continues. So we forget that we forget that he's a rookie, and there's still some upside there for him. So we can see some additional growth there. And
I was going to say I thought he wasn't part of that. That's why I went so firmly with it too. I think I certainly could see room for growth with Busch. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping that.
He is, by the way, 5 months younger than Nico Horner.
That's
wild to think about, man. Wild to think about.
And I think that you've got Nico Horner is the guy you can move to make room for Matt Shaw, right? Like he's there's no other place. You ran it down, James, where you talked about all the guys that are locked in positions for contractual and no trade clause reasons. So if you want a Matt Shaw in your lineup, that's kind of the only place to put him. So I feel with everyone getting old, how old is Ian Happ going to be? He's 31 next year.
Yeah.
30.
So these guys aren't getting any younger, so I don't anticipate them getting better for those that are north of 30. So
I guess he won't be. Yeah, he just turned 30, right?
I think so. Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna have to say that's still gonna be a 2 for me in the slight regression.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's a 2 or 3. I would say maybe it goes up to 3 if you throw Busch and Armstrong in, which I know is cheating because I told you not to. But you probably would have to in order to feel like to add the upside guys. And I think Paredes too. If you look at just what he did as a Cub versus what he could do next year as a Cub, I feel that's where you could get your biggest bang for the buck because he was pretty bad as a Cub.
Better hope to God you do.
Yeah, Jed. So that's another area, but I don't have as much confidence in the Miguel Amaya experiment as some do.
No,
he had a great July and August, but boy, he stunk again in September. And in his bad months, he was like worse than John Lester as a hitter, bad. And that's like April, May, June,
and he sure as hell doesn't have the glove to justify keeping that in the lineup. I don't think Moises Ballesteros is riding through that door in April to save him if he ends up struggling again next year. That's why I really think that's ultimately going to be the single biggest area that you're going to have to look for some immediate improvement as a catcher.
They got to figure out if Ballesteros is even a catcher.
Yeah,
good point.
So we've come to the conclusion, I think, collectively, that the lineup itself will need some external help in order to improve.
Yes.
Yep.
Best case scenario, they stay the same, which is probably not good enough.
No, and that's I
good enough for
really
82
feel like
wins.
it's gonna. I really feel they're gonna run back that lineup, and we're gonna be like, oh my god, we're doing this again.
So do you think there's any possibility they end up trading Nico Horner? It feels like when you look at who's available in the free agent market, the Torreses and the Ha-Seong Kims of the world, you look at that and go, Nico Horner is going to be cheaper than either of those guys and has comparative stats. I think he could be a very intriguing trade chip for somebody.
Yeah, I mean, the Mariners are an intriguing trade partner because they've got, Cal Raleigh, the catcher, who hits 30 home runs. Now he's going to hit 215. Let's not forget. But
so does Kyle Schwarber. It doesn't matter.
Most Cub catchers do hit 215. They just don't hit the 30 plus home runs. So I mean, I'll take it. But they've also got the Luis Castillo contract. They've got some interesting pieces out there that you might be able to play with if you're looking to to trade some of your prospects / help them out financially with some things. So something to keep an eye on. That could be a two birds with one stone kind of situation, right? Where you get a legit starting pitcher and a catcher, and it all costs you a second baseman who's replaced by somebody in your system already. Just an idea.
And even then, you still have James Triantos in the system too.
Yes,
so even if Matt Shaw doesn't immediately come in and help, you've got backfill there too, which is also supremely helpful.
Got Michael Busch, you could play second, and Bellinger could move to first, and Suzuki could DH and could go to right field, and Ballesteros could DH. So you've got then you start having the kind of flexibility that you want to have on a roster, right, where you can kind of move people around. But okay,
it's still no stars. You've cleared out no space for any stars yet.
No. So we've talked starting pitching, and we've talked the core lineup. Let me ask you about prospects, because we hear a lot about the Cubs farm system, and the Cubs have anywhere between 7 and 9 guys per, at any one time who are top 100 on somebody's list somewhere, right? And we saw Piquet Armstrong come up and Michael Busch come up. We've seen Ben Brown, and we feel like we're about to see Cade Horton eventually. All these other names keep getting closer and closer, like the Shaws and the Caseys and the Ballesteros. I mean, these guys are like just on the cusp. Like they've been to AAA now, right? Like it's just a question of clearing space for them. Canario, oddly, I guess they've already given up on. But even though he has the highest OPS on the team, but apparently he strikes out too much. So who knows, right? My question to you, though, is of the players who are still in the minors who have not come up yet, do you have confidence that any one of them or group of them could come up and perform better than the person they're replacing in 2025? Because look, I get the idea that you like to have young players come up and then develop them over a couple of years. But, if we're starting to go down that track, then are we talking about trying to be competitive in 2027? Or are we talking about, it's for 2025, are there players who you're like, yeah, that guy could come up in 2025 and make a difference on this team? I'm getting greedy here. I want to see some results.
I worry that, PCA was the ceiling of your farm system, and he's here, and this is it. Like, so I none of those guys you just listed are, now they could all be, one of them could hit and be a surprise star and really catch on. Absolutely possible.
There are flaws, I guess, with each one of them, as there always are with people, right? Like Ballesteros probably can't play the field, with any grace.
You still have to remember how young he is too, and I think that's a caution that I have for people painting with like the really broad brush with him and Owen Casey about their defenses. It's like, you got to remember, these were two of the youngest guys in AAA when they came up. Like,
and he's been behind the plate, like fake catching for a while, so he hasn't really had a chance to play anywhere else.
And also remember that Michael Busch was atrocious defensively at first base couple months of the season, and really turned it around in the second half. So you can never like fully write that off. So I do have to offer that word of caution to folks and not saying you were doing that. I'm just saying, like, I've heard a lot of people kind of say, oh, well, these guys have these, defined limits. And it's like, all right, let's not go crazy with the 21-year-olds and like, kind of thinking they've got it completely like solidified just yet. But
the problem for all these guys is, and fair or unfair, you're talking about replacing like a Gold Glove caliber second baseman in Nico Horner. You're talking about replacing like a Cody Bellinger in right field, like guys who can really play the defensive positions that you'd
Yes.
be going into. That's where it's not that the guys coming up wouldn't necessarily be butchers, but they're not going to be as good as those guys from Jump Street.
The way I was thinking about it is that if Bellinger does end up opting out, like, would I rather have Owen Casey in right field or Seiya Suzuki? And honestly, I'd rather have Owen Casey because I haven't seen that movie before. I know what I'm getting when I run Seiya out there, and I don't want to see a repeat of that. And so I think that the power element that Owen Casey brings into the mix, and I think that you probably make an argument that it'll at least be comparable and about even with Seiya defensively, and there's even a possibility he could be better. That's probably the guy I would circle as the guy that I think could potentially replace a guy and make a bigger impact. So I think I would end up sticking with Owen Casey, but only if we're talking specifically about Seiya Suzuki. With Cody, the power average is out a little bit more, and of course Cody's going to be a better defensive right fielder than Casey, and so I'd have to revisit a little bit if that were the case.
My hope for next season is that when one of the starters goes down with an injury, whether it's Happ or Bellinger or whomever, and they go on the IL, that the Cubs call someone up from AAA and play that person 14 days in a row or 12 out of 14, right? And just give them a shot in limited action while the other starter is on the IL, and don't say, you know what, we promised Mike Tauchman 9 of those starts, or, Miles Mastroboni, we want to try him out in right just in case, or, well, Patrick Wisdom's played left before, or Nick Madrigal offers a spark in your line, enough of that, right? Bring a guy up, let him rip. Limited time, let him do it for a week. If he's overmatched, can't do it, fine, send him back down. But at least give him a chance, not like 3 at-bats in 10 days, like they did with Canario, right? Just give somebody a chance. And hopefully they'll feel comfortable based on the players they have in the farm system now, giving somebody that chance because they're more seasoned and it's not that much of a stretch or reach to do that, I hope. Because if not, if they still feel that none of those guys can play for a week at the major league level, that just tells me that this is just kind of,
makes me wonder what the heck MLB pipeline sees in them then if the Cubs
exactly right. That. We see other teams do it, right?
Yeah.
It's just so anyway. That's my thought.
Final bit of news before we close out this podcast. We've got some coaching cuts made this morning. They let go first base coach Mike Napoli, hitting coach Jim Adducci, and bullpen coach Darren Holmes. A couple of strength coaches as well, per Jesse Rogers. I'm surprised Tommy Hodavi's made the cut still again. James, do you see? We know that Craig Counsell didn't get to bring in his own coaches, so we figured there would be a lot of cuts. Do you think there's still more to come?
I think it's interesting, the cuts that have been kind of announced already, and I think we probably could have foreseen them making those changes in the strength and conditioning coaches just based on the number of injuries and the pretty consistent knocks that some guys were picking up. And of course, some of that's always going to be luck, but some of it you always have to go, well, eventually you make a change. Thank God they didn't Luol Deng anybody, but certainly not for those who aren't familiar, by the way, they gave Luol Deng a completely unnecessary spinal tap. The Bulls did. So no medical negligence going on with the Cubs, thankfully. But I think that the only one that really surprised me at least a little bit was Mike Napoli. And I know he was a David Ross guy, but he also was a guy who was given a lot of special praise by quite a few players who have said that he really helped them to kind of evolve as base stealers. You think of a guy like PCA, for example, definitely said that about
not because
Mike
he was
Napoli.
A catcher, because he sure as hell wasn't fast.
That'd be my guess, is it was a timing thing, right? It was kind of like a timing mechanism. But also, you had PCA dancing off first base constantly and driving us all to the point of madness. So I guess there was some give and take there. But I think that none of them were particularly surprising to me. I think that you were absolutely right when you said the idea that you want Craig Counsell to be able to bring in his own guys and kind of shape the staff in the way that he wants to, totally within, the understandable realm. It just surprised me a little bit that Napoli was among the first casualties just based on how highly a lot of the guys talked about him.
Yeah, I'm of the belief that Counsell should bring in anybody he wants, fire them all for all I care. I mean, and I'm sure there are good coaches there too,
Mhm.
but
And there is also a
allowed,
possibility Napoli could be getting a higher job, and they may be allowing him that opportunity. I will say that too.
let council hire his people. He's the manager. It's his crew, right? Like who he's comfortable with. That's what, speaking his message. That's why I'm so happy to see John Maley still around, because our former hitting coach
Friend of
is
the
still in
show.
the organization, friend of the show. But no, I was a little surprised that the Cubs decided to depart from their first base coach, but not their third base coach, which is another interesting move.
Waving Willie.
In fairness, they didn't get enough people on first base, and who are you going to blame for that? I blame the first base coach for not encouraging them to run faster down the line.
Respect 90, boys. Respect 90.
Yep.
And last bit of news, late breaking as we go to record this podcast. Pete Rose dies at 83 years old. Pat, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on Pete Rose?
I was never a big Pete Rose fan when he was a player. I wasn't old enough to remember him. He had the heyday from like 65 to 76 when he was lights out. I just remember the second half of his career, and it kind of like the Fat Elvis part of his career. He was bad. I mean, he just was. Like when he was with the Phillies playing first base, hitting 3 home runs a year with an OPS of like 700 or whatever, and he wasn't that good. He was an accumulator at that point. And then of course, but I do remember the hitting streak. I was old enough to vaguely, not really fully appreciate it, but I remember that happening, and that's an impressive thing. He had the hits record. You can't take that away from him. The gambling thing was what it was. I mean, he gambled on his own team, and he was the manager making decisions as to who was going to play. That's just you just can't do that. I do feel like we've reached a point now where the league itself is so hypocritical when it comes to gambling. All these leagues are hypocritical. They're all sponsored by gambling companies. They all, on the pregame show for the Bears the other day, doing their parlays, like they were like the can you imagine? I mean, I remember when Jimmy the Greek used to be on before the games, and that was considered scandalous because he would tell you he would actually tell you what the lines were on the game. Well, everybody knows the lines now. It's on ESPN. It's on your score thing, at all times. But now they each of the broadcasters has their own like parlay. Well, here's my parlay for the day, and this and that. So look, gambling has run rampant in all these sports. We will and have a little bit, but we will continue to see much more, I think, in the way of scandals moving forward. It's inevitable with point shaving and other player performance issues with prop bets and other things where people do things in an effort to make money on the side. So that's going to happen, I'm sure. But after the Black Sox scandal, Pete Rose was a big, when that story broke, that was a big deal back then, and gambling was just not allowed. The big signs in the clubhouses back then, no gambling allowed, and it was just they took it seriously, and he got caught up in that, and that's too bad because obviously he would have made the Hall of Fame had it not been for that with his 79 WAR, and that's the way it goes. So he didn't make it to a period where he could be, I guess, forgiven by the league. We'll see if Sammy Sosa can, for God's sake. But yeah, so far Pete Rose couldn't. Maybe he can bring it up with Bart Giamatti if he sees him, in the afterlife here. But yeah, those are my feelings on Pete Rose. It was an unfortunate situation for the game of baseball, but I know he has his real fans who really, are huge Pete Rose people. Most of them live in Cincinnati, but or elsewhere. But I guess in my final thoughts would be this. He is notorious for playing the game, gritty, like crashing to Ray Fosse in the All-Star game and being a tough guy or whatever, and running out the ball, Charlie Hustle, et cetera, et cetera. He was also kind of an a-hole, though, too, I think. I mean, just in full disclosure, right? I think other players would have told you that, too, and probably did at the time. So, like a lot of these guys, he was a mixed bag. of different qualities and traits.
I mean, truth be told, we're all kind of mixed bags in our own ways. I think we're all, I mean, it's just human beings are, very complicated. And I think that when you talk about his baseball legacy, I think that it's totally right to include the gambling allegations and then ultimately what was confirmed about that, along with his just insatiable desire to compete. And I think that's what you always want from guys. You always want them to have a real passion for the game. I think Pete Rose said that he would wear a gasoline suit and a fire to play baseball or something like that. Like, it was just he was a very hard-nosed guy.
Please don't do that at home.
No, certainly do not recommend doing that just to play baseball. That would probably be a bad life choice. And I know the Wrigleyville Nation podcast is not about broadcasting bad life choices. So other than watching Cubs baseball, of course. But I will say that that's obviously a huge part of his legacy to me. I think that, I do think that Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I think that the lifetime ban preventing him from, managing or being in a front office capacity or something like that, very valid and was completely right to uphold until his death. But I think that his place in baseball history can absolutely not be erased or ignored. And I feel the same way about guys like Barry Bonds and all the others who are not in the Hall of Fame despite their incredible talents. I mean, you look at the numbers that Shohei Ohtani was putting up this season, and in a lot of ways he falls short of what Barry Bonds is like 9 best seasons in MLB. Like, it is completely preposterous to think about that, but just, you can't write the history of the game without those guys. And I think that, Pete, go ahead.
Palmeiro?
Sorry.
Sammy Sosa, Palmeiro.
Yep.
Is that
Roger Clemens, for God's sake, one of the best pitchers we've seen in the game, also not in the Hall of Fame.
Some of these guys I don't like at all, but you know what? I'm with you, James. If you're going to let them in, just let them all in. Right.
And another thing too, like, you shouldn't keep guys out of being in the Hall of Fame because they're assholes either. Like, that's certainly, the case with a guy like Barry Bonds. I would imagine there's some part of that at play. And then Pete Rose would be kind of the same thing. I will also say that in addition to the gambling stuff, you can't overlook the fact that he admitted to having a sexual relationship with a 16-year-old too. Like, it wasn't just him being, a dick to reporters. He was also, the age of consent in Ohio at the time was only 16, but you can't, sit there and tell me that, that's, completely morally clear, especially considering he was married with 2 kids at the time too. Like, that's creepy. There's a lot going on there. And I know that, like, the Rose acknowledged the relationship. I know he, disputed that he'd done anything wrong or illegal, and that was a whole complicated thing. We'll never know the full truth of what happened with that, but it just, again, goes to show that human beings are very complicated. And you can celebrate Pete Rose's legacy as a baseball player while also freely acknowledging there was a lot of unsavory, being charitable, and downright bad things about
criminal,
him too.
Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
The gambling stuff.
And I think you absolutely have to acknowledge all of that. And again, I don't think it's speaking ill of the dead to bring those things up. Yeah. So a very complicated legacy. And I think just another example of the fact that you have to remember that these are not heroes carved in granite, or in marble. They are human beings of flesh and blood. And just keep that in mind as you eulogize a player like Pete Rose.
Yeah. And you'll hear a lot about his 8.3 WAR in 1973 and, some of those seasons he had with the big red machine and stuff. And those are, pretty an epic period of time. And he was a catalyst on those teams. And that will always stand despite everything else around it.
And I'm the person that'll tell you about the big red machine Kane giving Pete Rose a tombstone at WrestleMania 14 in Boston.
Yes.
Leading to Pete Rose being inducted into the celebrity wing of the WWE Hall of Fame.
I saw that. That was interesting. So he is in a Hall of Fame. It's just the WWF Hall of Fame.
That is correct.
Yeah, well, so's Donald Trump, lest we forget. He's also in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Also correct, yes. Mr. T should be in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
let's get Jeremy riled up on that.
I'll do another 20 minutes on. Come find my wrestling podcast here in the Cubs off season, where I talk about all kinds of fun wrestling stuff at Wrestling at Random. All right, and with that, we are going to get to one of our favorite times here on the podcast. That's when we take a trip back to 1984, 40 years ago this week, Pat. What was going on with our 1984
what a week
Cubs?
for the Cubs. Well, it was a 4-2 week for the Cubs. They played at Pittsburgh for 3 games, then home for the Cardinals for 3. I think the most important game of that week happened on Monday, September 24th, when the Cubs played the Pirates in front of 5,000 fans, 5,472
It's
fans,
insane to think about.
which was more than the 4,000 they got the next day and the 3,000 they got the day after, because the Cubs' magic number was 1 at the time. And I promise you that if the Cubs were playing in Pittsburgh and the magic number was 1, you'd have 15,000 Cub fans going there now, right?
Absolutely.
Let alone
Yeah.
5,000 total. Rick Sutcliffe started for the Cubs. Rick Sutcliffe was victorious. He got his 20th win of the year, his 16th as a Cub. He was 16-1 as a Cub after the trade from Cleveland. 9 innings, 2 hits, 1 run, no walks, 9 strikeouts. Just another awesome game by Rick Sutcliffe that year. Struck out the last batter, pitched the complete game, of course. He wasn't going to let anybody else get in the way of that. It was a 4-1 victory for the Cubs. It was a great way to mark what was the Cubs' first ever division championship. Because when they went to the divisions in the 60s, of course, the Cubs had not won any because they hadn't finished over 500 in 12 years, let alone won a division. So Cubs won. They went home. They played the Cardinals. They split the first 2 games. The Sunday game was kind of fun because it mattered not at all. Most the Cubs starters all started the game, but they were all taken out early. So it was all the backups in the game. Cubs are down 1-0, bottom of the 9th. And the Cardinals bring out Bruce Sutter, who at the time had 45 saves, which was leading the league, right? That was an enormous number of saves back in 1984. Had a 1.50 ERA. This was a season when, although Rick Sutcliffe won the Cy Young, Bruce Sutter finished 3rd in the Cy Young in the National League. And he finished 6th in the MVP. So he was he was a stud pitcher for the Cardinals. So what happens down 1-0? Well, the veritable onslaught of Cubs stars, starting with Henry Cotto, most famous for having punctured his eardrum with a Q-tip and going on the 60-day IL once when he was a Mariner, led off with a base hit. Dan Roan, who was the actual hero of the Sandberg game, he drove in the winning run in the Sandberg game, despite Sandberg's 2 home runs off of Sutter. He gets a base hit. And then previously discussed Thad Bosley comes in, pinch hitter extraordinaire. He gets a base hit, ties the game 1-1. Gary Woods, another sort of part-time Cub player of some lore, draws a walk. And then Keith Moreland, the only regular in the lineup at this point, Zonk, as we call him, former University of Texas linebacker, I think, comes up to the plate. He hits a ground ball to 3rd. Bases loaded. Nobody out. They throw to the catcher for the force out. Back to first base. Throw the ball away. And Thad Bosley scores from 2nd, and the Cubs win the game in a walk-off. So the Cubs finish with 96 wins on the season with a walk-off win in front of the home team in a packed crowd on a Sunday against the Cardinals, just for fun with our 3rd string. And the Cubs end up winning the division by 6.5. And after the game, I never forgot, Jim Fry had all the players come out of the dugout in the clubhouse, and they all walked around the perimeter of the ballpark, high-fiving and shaking hands and talking and signing autographs to all the fans all the way around the entire field, which was kind of cool because I'd never even experienced anything like winning. So this was really fun. So the Cubs finished today, would have been the 40-year anniversary of that walk-off win against Bruce Sutter and the dreaded St. Louis Cardinals. And the Cubs then had been slotted to play, and we'll talk next week about this, the San Diego Padres. Cubs and Padres being the only 2 National League teams never to be in an NLCS until now. Because remember, back then you didn't have divisional series. You just 2 teams made the playoffs in the National League. They played each other, and one of them went to the World Series. So the last 2 teams in the National League to never win a division, both win it in the same year. Cubs will be hosting Game 1 next week, and I can't wait to tell you what happens then. Or maybe
and everybody lived happily ever after, right? Like I'm pretty sure that's how that ended. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. So there you go.
All right. With that, we are going to wrap it up we're going to call it a regular season for the 2024 Chicago Cubs. Good times whenever these three get together. We talk about the Cubs. It's time always flies. This is always a great time. James, thank you for coming on to talk Cubs with us. Please remind our listeners how they can find all your work on the internet.
So up until today, the final day of NBC Sports Chicago, I was the co-host of the Cubs Talk podcast and the Big Ten Country podcast. Really enjoyed doing both of those things, and a really special shout out to a lot of my colleagues at the network who are either going on to new jobs or new challenges. So blessed to work with so many great people. You can continue to find my work on NBCChicago.com, where I'm the managing editor for the digital duopoly. You can also find me on X at James Neveau, and obviously floating around podcast territory right now, kind of a free agent at the moment. So if you need somebody to come on and yammer about the Cubs or Big Ten football or whatever it is, you know what, hit me up on X or email me. I will probably say yes to it, because, man, I'm going to miss recording those episodes every Sunday.
You can follow us on all the social media platforms as well, at Wrigleyville Nat. WrigleyvilleNation.com, of course, has all the links to subscribe to this podcast. The YouTube channel, we launched it at the beginning of this season. And thank you to everyone who's come over and hit the subscribe button. Helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. We've got 113 subscribers as of the time of this podcast, so not bad for a lot of people are new listeners to the podcast. They discovered it through YouTube. So yeah, definitely. If you haven't subscribed, please throw a subscription over there. That helps us out. Stay subscribed to the podcast if you consume through your audio channels as well, because we will be coming back not only next week, but we'll be coming back periodically when there's things to talk about in the off season. So we're going to try to be, we always come back monthly to check in, catch up on the news that's going on. There's winter meetings. There's hot stove talk. There's always something to talk about. We'll talk about Cubs convention, all kinds of stuff that's happening, all off season long. So make sure you continue to stay subscribed and not miss an episode. I'm gonna drop a super cut of Pat's 1984 segments at the end of this season. So we'll have a whole recap of the entire 1984 season. So all that to come. So make sure you stay subscribed. And there's a sale at our TeePublic shop. So if you're thinking about buying merch at some point, no better time than now, like 35% off. I'm wearing one of the t-shirts if you're watching on YouTube right now. I've got coffee mugs, hats, everything over. The link is on the store link at WrigleyvilleNation.com or pinned to the top of our X and Instagram as well. And with that, thank you also to our Patreon, patreon.com/WrigleyvilleNation. Our patrons over there kept us ad-free for another full season. We did it. No commercials, because our patrons over there and their generosity continue to keep us ad-free for another season. So thank you to them as well. And thank you for joining us, Pat.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.